United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres urges world leaders to act on climate funding. German inflation rises to 2.4% in October. And OPEC lowers its forecast for global oil demand growth in 2024 by 107,000 barrels. Welcome to the Economic Bulletin, where we bring you comprehensive coverage and expert insights on key updates regarding pivotal economic trends and financial shifts.
It gives me great pleasure to declare open the 29th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
COP29 must tear down the walls of climate finance.
Welcome back. We'll start off with the COP29 summit in Baku, where the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres urged world leaders to pay up in order to prevent climate-related humanitarian disasters, stressing that time is running out to avert catastrophic global temperature rises. Nearly 200 countries have gathered for the annual UN Climate Conference, which seeks to raise hundreds of billions of dollars to finance a global shift towards cleaner energy and mitigate the climate damage caused by carbon emissions.
COP29 must tear down the walls of climate finance. Developing countries must not leave Baku empty-handed. A deal is a must, and I'm confident it will be reached. We need a new finance goal that meets the moment.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that he is set to announce ambitious goals to cut emissions at COP29. Starmer reaffirmed the UK's pledge to cut emissions by 81% by 2035 compared to 1990 levels, and emphasised that it's not about telling people how to live their lives. He added that a $1 billion order for blades for offshore wind turbines has been secured. The blades will be manufactured in Hull, generating jobs for the northeastern city.
That we get to clean power by 2030. That's the single most important target on the way to the emissions, and that will bring with it lower bills for people.
Moreover, countries at COP29 in Baku approved quality standards for carbon credits, a key step towards creating a UN-backed global carbon market aimed at funding projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This agreement sets the stage for a global marketplace where governments and companies can fund projects worldwide that offset their own emissions. These projects could include CO2-absorbing forests or clean energy solutions in low-income communities. If implemented, the UN-backed market could generate $250 billion annually by 2030, cutting 5 billion tons of carbon emissions each year.
In which parties can consider any further guidance to the
Building on COP29's early decision to set quality standards for carbon credits, this summit is now moving closer to launching a UN-backed global carbon market. This initiative, crucial to funding projects that reduce emissions worldwide, aims to provide governments and businesses with a verified system to offset their emissions through carbon credits. The new standards, guided by Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, offer two routes. one for direct bilateral agreements between countries and another for centralized UN-run market. Projects in this market could range from reforestation efforts to renewable energy installations in low-income regions. By ensuring that credits represent real emission cuts, COP29 framework helps address credibility issues that have long challenged carbon markets. With these standards, the UN-backed market is expected to drive major climate finance, potentially generating $250 billion per year by 2030 and offsetting 5 billion tons of carbon emissions annually. If final details are resolved at COP29, the system could launch as early as 2025, opening new opportunities for nations and businesses to achieve global climate goals through verified carbon credits.
And joining us today to discuss the COP29 and the carbon market and climate finance is the economist and specialist in energy affairs, Mr. Amir Shubeki. Mr. Shubeki, thank you for joining us here on Q News. Sir, can you tell us first what are the key steps COP29 has taken towards launching the UN-backed global carbon market, and how will this impact global emissions reduction efforts?
Good evening for you and for all your viewers. I think right now COP29 in Baku is coming in the consequences of Trump's victory, and also in the light of other complicated issues. I think that the current conference will have a lot of difficulties regarding having one opinion and specific decisions that could have a serious impact, especially that the main goals for COP29 right now is secure the finance that was so clear that it actually needed $100 trillion. It was known that there is about $100 million needed from the rich states, and right now they understood that the poor states need more money in order to secure the transition into the reducing into these carbon reductions. So I think that was the reason that made Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, to say that the rich people are the reason for what is happening, and the poor people are the one who is paying the price. Of course, right now, Trump's return to the White House means that the withdrawal of United States will withdraw too from its commitment and from the other international agreement regarding of environment, and also maybe the headquarters of protecting environment in Washington will be removed from that place, and also we can witness that there will be more oil production inside the United States. Of course, this is cause the decline of other major powers. We know that competing against the climate change crisis need international effort, not an effort by one state. So all the states need to be responsible for these crises. Despite that, we're gonna see a very destructive consequences.
So about the carbon markets, how will the standards set by COP29 address the long-standing credibility issues in the carbon markets, as in what specific measures are being put in place to ensure that carbon credits represent the actual emission reductions?
One of the things that was discussed a lot regarding the carbon is the fees that will be approved regarding the impact these emissions. Also, that was discussed in other and previous conferences, and there has been serious conversations in Emirates and also in the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. The most important thing right now is the implementation implementation of these resolutions. It's not issuing the resolutions is not the most important thing. We need the implementation. We need to have these things that we are discussing on the ground. I think that is a main challenge facing the whole world right now.
Mr. Shubeki, now, if the carbon markets actually launches as early as 2025, what will be the immediate next steps for countries and companies to begin participating in this system?
Yes, I believe if that was this market was launched by these states, I think it will be a good step regarding the emissions reductions and also would protect the other resources that could be enough to help the poor states, which would mean that reducing that gap between rich countries and the poor countries in competing against, fighting against the climate change. That could be implemented only if it was, that decision was taken by the all countries. And we know that China, the factory of the world, is still using more than 50%, relying on coal by more than 50%. It's difficult and important to force China to follow these instructions to abandon using the coal. In addition to that, we still we are looking to the opening of new resources of coal in the European states as they are trying to find new energy, not from the Russian. I think this step is going to be implemented, but we need to have a serious step that could be convinced other states in order to have them achieved, in order to have these fees implemented on some states. I think that was possible in the past 4 years during the Democratic administration, but right now I think it became more difficult in the coming 4 years where Trump would be the president.
So if we look from a broader perspective, what are the key drivers behind increasing the climate finance to $1 trillion annually? And how will this target help developing countries meet their climate goals?
I will be honest with you. The rich states, the wealthy states, will not be able to provide this amount of funds in order to help the poor states in fighting against the global the climate change. They were unable to do so in the previous conferences. How they will be able to do so in these financial crises that striking the developing states? So for that reason, I believe that one of the solutions is impose the fees and the taxes of the carbon that will be transferred for that fund, in order to raise that money to help these poor states. But from another side, some of these states and some of these emerging economies see that the current time is a chance to get benefit from all its resources. And Ali Payev, the president of Azerbaijan, who has been who was supporting this conference, saying that these are resources that Allah gave to us, referring to the oil and the gas, mentioning that it's important for the state to get benefit from these resources. In addition to that, many other states have been using some tools in order to emission reductions of carbon.
Then how can the developed countries overcome the challenges of actually meeting the $1 trillion annual climate finance target? What will happen next?
I think some of the statistics are referring that the world needs more than $1 trillion in order to be able to use the renewable energy as an alternative for the fossil fuel. at the beginning, we need to have a political resolution that all the states were going to support for regarding the emissions reductions, and to acknowledge that that is the main reason for the climate change. But I believe that if we didn't raise that money, I think we will pay in the future. We are going to pay the double of that money at the cost for the climate change that will not only cause a lot of casualties and will reduce the resources of food and so on. It's going to also destroy islands, countries, and it will cause more refugees. Will cause a famine and maybe wars. So the causes of and the consequences of the climate change is really higher than what it costs for today.
Mr. Amir Shubeki, the economist and specialist in energy affairs, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, now we move to the latest developments from around the world. The German Federal Statistics Office has reported that the nation's inflation rose to 2.4% in October. German consumer prices, harmonized to compare with other European Union countries, had risen by 1.8% year-on-year in September. The Federal Statistical Office reported that in October 2024, inflation was primarily driven by rising food prices and continued above-average increases in service costs. In contrast, energy prices helped moderate the inflation rate, though their dampening effect was less significant than in previous months. According to the British Office for National Statistics, the UK's unemployment rate rose by 0.3 percentage points to 4.3% in the July to September period, compared to the same period the previous year. During this period, there were over 1.48 million unemployed individuals in the country. The unemployment rate remained relatively stable at 74.8%, with 33.3 million people employed in the UK. Market expectations had forecasted the unemployment rate to remain at 4.1% for the July to September period. According to Russia's central bank, foreign trade surplus grew by 11.55% in the first 9 months of 2024, reaching $114.9 billion. Exports increased by 0.41% to $318.2 billion, while imports dropped 5.2% to $203.3 billion. Exports to Europe fell by 23.3% to 50.1 billion, while imports from Europe dropped to 8.75%. In contrast, exports to Asia rose 6.4% to $240.3 billion, and imports from the region declined by 3.14%. Surplus in 2023 had shrunk by 58.5% year-on-year to $140 billion. Government data released showed that India's retail inflation in October has accelerated to 6.21% year-on-year, reaching the central bank's target range for the first time in over a year, as food prices remain stubbornly high. Annual inflation for food items, which account for nearly half of the consumption basket, rose to 10.87% from 9.24% a month ago. The Reserve Bank of India is mandated to keep inflation in a range of 2 to 6%, with a medium-term target of 4%. Government data showed that India's industrial output rose 3.1% year-on-year in September, backed by manufacturing activity. Data showed that manufacturing output climbed 3.9% year-on-year in September. Electricity generation grew 0.5% and mining activity rose 0.2%. During April to September, industrial output increased by 4% compared to a revised 6.2% a year earlier. In the MENA region, Egypt's trade with Saudi Arabia grew by 33.9% in the first 9 months of 2024, reaching $7.5 billion, up from $5.6 billion in the same period last year. The increase was driven by a 26.3% rise in Egyptian exports to Saudi Arabia, which totaled $2.4 billion, and a 37.8% rise in imports amounting to $5.1 billion. Saudi investments in Egypt totaled $511.3 million in 2023-2024, down from $2.3 billion the previous year. Egyptian investments in Saudi Arabia amounted to $147.1 million compared to $190.1 million last year. The Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey showed that the country's current account dropped below $10 billion in September, the lowest level in 33 months. Turkey's current account balance posted a surplus of $2.98 billion in September. The bank noted that the gold and energy excluded current account balance also saw net surplus of $7.7 billion that month. In September, the goods trade deficit stood at $3.1 billion, while the services sector recorded a net inflow of $7.4 billion. Within services, the travel category posted a net inflow of $5.97 billion. OPEC has lowered its forecast for global oil demand growth in 2024 by 107,000 barrels, bringing the expected growth to 1.8 million barrels per day. Additionally, OPEC reduced its demand growth forecast for OPEC Plus oil by 100,000 barrels, setting it at 500,000 barrels per day for 2024. The organization maintained its outlook for non-OPEC Plus supply growth in 2025 at an unchanged rate of 1.11 million barrels per day, and for 2024, it remains steady at 1.23 million barrels per day. Oil prices steadied on recovering from a 5% drop over the previous 2 sessions as investors absorbed OPEC's latest downward revision for oil demand. Brent crude futures rose to settle at $72.02 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures went up 0.2% to record $68.20 a barrel. Bitcoin stood at almost $90,000 for the first time, boosted by Donald Trump's win. Investors are welcoming Trump's embrace of digital assets and the prospect of Congress featuring pro-crypto lawmakers. Bitcoin has become one of the most eye-catching movers in the week since the election and touched $89,637 in Asia, a gain of more than 25% since November 5th. Trump has positioned himself as a supporter of the cryptocurrency industry advocating for it as a counter to the stricter regulatory stance taken by the Securities and Exchange Commission under President Joe Biden. He pledged to make the United States the crypto capital of the world. Global markets had a mixed performance today after key economic data came out from Asia and Europe. In the United States, early trading Dow futures slipped nearly 0.1%, and the S&P 500 futures fell less than 0.1%. In Europe, France's CAC 40 declined 0.9%, while Germany's DAX fell 0.8%, and Britain's FTSE 100 shed 0.7%. In Asia, Japan's benchmark Nikkei 225 declined 0.4%, South Korea's Kospi declined 1.9%, Hong Kong's Hang Seng dropped 2.8%, and the Shanghai Composite lost 1.4%. These are all the news we have for now, but here's a reminder of today's key headlines. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres urges world leaders to act on climate funding. German inflation rises to 2.4% in October. And OPEC lowers its forecast for global oil demand growth in 2024 by 107,000 barrels. That's all for today's Economic Bulletin here on Qnews, but please stay connected for more news and updates. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.